All right, Bio 30. So we're going to continue the discussion about the ear. Last we left, we discussed how the organ of Corti is part of our inner ear where hearing is actually occurring. So in the organ of Corti, we've got the basilar membrane, outer hair cells, inner hair cells, and then the auditory nerve. And then that's going to send signals, of course, to the brain, specifically the temporal lobe of the brain. So we've already kind of mentioned this, but the organ of Corti contains little hairs along a basilar membrane. And so what happens is the basilar membrane starts out stiff and slowly begins to narrow and become more flexible. Think of like a xylophone. When the basilar membrane moves, it causes bending in these hair cells that are attached to it. And then as those hair cells bend, uh, action potentials are propagated to the temporal lobe through the auditory nerve. So it's really complicated, but it doesn't need to be in this explanation. All we have to really understand is that we've got a basilar membrane, we've got uh, hair-like projections attached to another membrane, and as those hair-like projections move due to sound vibrations, the hair cells are going to send a signal, a nerve signal, through the auditory nerve to the temporal lobe of the brain to get processed. Here's another diagram that sort of breaks down the ear in a more unique way. We've got the outer ear with the pinna, right? We're trying to channel those sound waves into the middle ear with your ossicles, the small bones in the ear. And you've got the inner ear, the most complicated portion of the ear. This is where you have your cochlear membrane, you've got your hair cells, and as those hair cells move, they send signals to the brain that say, hey, we perceived a sound. Depending on which part of the hair cells are triggered, that's going to dictate like pitch and loudness of the sound based off of how the brain perceives it. So sensory receptors of the ear are the hair cells, and they convert sound vibrations into those nervous system action potentials. So if you ever had to like memorize what the path of the sound is throughout the ear, it goes pinna, auditory canal, tympanic membrane or eardrum, ossicles, those really small bones, that's the middle ear. There's the name hammer, anvil, stirrup, or um, there's other names for them as well. Then you go into the cochlea, which is your inner ear, which consists of the organ of Corti, the basilar membrane, and the hair cells, and then the auditory nerve. And then from there, we're going to go to the temporal lobe of the brain. So this spells out P-A-T-O-C-A-T, so pat-o-cat. So think pat-o-cat when you want to remember the order of structures that sound goes through to get to the brain. Okay, so hearing loss is going to be due to any number of reasons. We're going to go through a couple. There could be problems with the canal itself. Maybe you've blocked the ear canal. Google something called cauliflower ear. It's a sort of not a mutation. It's what we call damage to the surface of the pinna. Wrestlers and boxers commonly have cauliflower ear, and they have hearing disruptions because the grooves and folds of the pinna of the ear are misshaped due to physical damage, like from punches, and so they can't hear very well. There's sensory neural causes, so maybe damage to your hair cells or the nerves that extend from the hair cells to the brain. You can have damage to the hair cells through extended exposure to loud noises. You can have chemicals or drugs that break down the hair cells or the nerve cells in the ear. Excessive use of antibiotics, aspirin, ibuprofen, can all cause potentially damage to your ear. You can treat hearing loss with conductive hearing technologies. Hearing aids are really common. They're good for people that have conductive hearing loss, but people who are more profoundly hard of hearing might benefit from something called a cochlear implant. Now, a cochlear implant is something that literally is implanted both in the ear and oftentimes parts of the temporal lobe of the brain, and it helps to artificially create that nervous system signal that the hair cells or something else in the cochlea just isn't properly doing. Tinnitus is a ringing in the ear, commonly described as just like a hiss or a ring, very annoying, drives people quite literally crazy often. Um, People with tinnitus usually require like counseling and psychiatric help because it's always there, and it's not only distracting but alarming. Um, Now it can be caused by damage to the ear. You might have temporary tinnitus if you've just been to like a really loud concert or heard a really loud explosion, but excessive damage can cause lasting ringing in the ears, which would be diagnosed as tinnitus. Um, so hearing aids, counseling, wearable sound generators that sort of cancel out that ringing are all possible solutions. Cochlear implant, like I said, it's basically a substitute for your cochlea itself. Something in there is not sending proper signals, and so this consists of a microphone, a speech processor, and a transmitter and receiver that are taking these impulses directly to the brain, which is quite beneficial for those that may have damage in this region. Okay, so here's the 4 parts of the cochlear implant if you wanted to kind of get more into the details there. And these are the parts that they correspond with for the natural structures that they might be replacing. Here's an example of a diploma exam picture. If you had to label these numbers, could you? Give it a pause on this video here and see if you can do it. Okay, here's the answers. Oops, there's the answers there. In the next video, I'll go through skin, taste, and smell really quickly in terms of senses. Thanks, guys.